The man leaned back in his chair, surrounded by polished marble floors and golden chandeliers. His laugh echoed across the grand hall, sharp, dismissive, almost cruel. In front of him stood a girl no older than 12, her hands clenched together, her voice trembling as she whispered a request most would consider so simple, yet to her it meant survival. Why would a man who owned everything laugh at a little girl's plea? And what did she say that shattered him only minutes later, leaving him unable to stop the tears rolling down his face? This isn't just a story about wealth and poverty. It's a story about human hearts colliding in a way no one expected. A moment that would change both their lives forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why this moment cuts so deep, we need to step back. The man's name was Adrien Whitmore. For decades, he was the face of success, his name etched onto skyscrapers, his wealth spread across cities. But his fortune came at a cost. Years earlier, an accident had left him confined to a wheelchair. Since then, he rarely left his estate. He was surrounded by marble floors, tall glass windows, and staff who treated him with respect or fear. Yet inside those walls, Adrien carried something heavier than wealth: bitterness. He believed people only came to him because they wanted something, never because they cared. Just a few streets away lived Sophie. Barely 12, with cracked shoes that no longer fit her growing feet, she spent her nights in a run-down shelter, the kind where the smell of damp blankets never truly fades. Her days were filled with searching, not for wealth, but for scraps of kindness, for someone who would see her as more than a forgotten child. When their paths crossed, it seemed like a collision of two worlds, his empire of glass and gold against her fragile world of hunger and loss. Adrien thought this girl was just another beggar who would ask him for money, but Sophie carried something more, a secret tied to a past Adrien thought he had buried long ago. The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that clings to your skin and makes hunger feel sharper, almost unbearable. Sophie had waited until the mansion's guards drifted toward the front gates, their laughter fading into the distance. She slipped quietly through the gardens, her small frame blending with the shadows. Her stomach ached, but what pushed her forward wasn't her hunger. It was a promise she had made to someone else. As she reached the back steps of the grand house, she saw him. Adrien Whitmore, the man whose wealth could buy anything, sitting in his chair beneath the glow of a chandelier that spilled out through tall windows. "Summoning courage," Sophie whispered, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Please, sir, may I have just one loaf of bread?" Adrien's response was a laugh, sharp, echoing across the courtyard like glass shattering. "Bread?" he mocked, his lips curling. "In this house, child, nothing is free." But what startled him was not her request, nor her poverty, it was her eyes. They did not flinch. They carried a strength, a defiance he hadn't seen in years. In that moment, Adrien thought he was merely turning away another beggar, another nuisance at his gate. What he didn't realize was that Sophie wasn't asking for herself alone. She carried a secret that would drag him into a past he had spent years trying to escape. To the world outside, Adrien Whitmore was untouchable. The newspapers called him the Iron Tycoon, a man who built an empire from steel and glass. His face was printed on magazine covers, his voice carried in boardrooms where decisions worth billions were made. But behind those polished images was a man imprisoned in his own mansion, isolated by both his wealth and his bitterness. His wheelchair was more than a symbol of an accident. It was a reminder of everything he had lost, of every connection he had cut off. He could summon 100 people with a single call, yet no one came to him out of love. Contrast that with Sophie's world. She shared a damp, broken-down orphanage with children even younger than herself, children whose fragile ribs pressed against thin skin, whose small eyes looked to her for comfort when food ran out. Sophie was only 12, yet she had become their voice, their strength, the one who searched for answers when others could barely lift their heads. And so her request for bread that night wasn't about a single meal. It was about survival for many. Adrien didn't see it then. To him, it was another nuisance, another beggar story he refused to pity. But the reason Sophie had come to him and why she dared to stand fearless before a man so feared by others would soon expose a wound even his millions could not heal. Adrien's mocking laughter filled the air, but it ended as suddenly as it began. Sophie had shifted nervously, and as she did, a small locket slipped from her collar, tumbling to the stone path. The faint metallic sound caught Adrien's ear, pulling his gaze downward. His eyes narrowed. He had seen that locket before. When his trembling hand lifted it, the world around him seemed to freeze. Inside was a photograph, faded, worn, but unmistakable. The face of a woman he once loved, a woman he had lost years ago. His voice cracked, sharp with panic. "Where did you get this?" Sophie hesitated, clutching her small hands together before whispering, "It was my mother's." In that instant, Adrien's heart pounded. The cruel mask he wore, the iron tycoon's coldness, all faltered. Because this orphan standing before him wasn't a stranger at all. She was tied to a past he thought was gone forever. And suddenly, everything he thought he knew about her plea for bread was about to change. The air inside the grand hall grew heavy, the kind of silence that presses against the chest. Adrien's hands shook as he held the locket, his eyes darting between the photograph and Sophie's face. Memories he had buried deep began to claw their way back. Memories of a woman who had once softened his hardened world. She was the only person who ever asked nothing of him, who loved him before the money, before the empire, before he became the Iron Tycoon. And yet, in his hunger for power, he had abandoned her. That woman was Sophie's mother. The truth pierced him like a blade, but instead of accepting it, Adrien's pride roared to the surface. He slammed the locket shut, his voice rising. "No, you're lying. This is some trick." But Sophie didn't cry. Her eyes, steady and unbroken, met his with a courage far beyond her years. She whispered almost defiantly, "I don't need you to believe me." Adrien's laugh returned, but this time it was hollow, desperate. Laughter meant to shield himself from the guilt gnawing at his soul. He laughed to protect himself from the truth, but the truth was already breaking him. As thunder rumbled outside, Sophie turned her back, her small frame illuminated by the flash of lightning. She stormed out of the mansion into the storm, leaving Adrien alone with the weight of a past he could no longer escape. That night, Adrien could not silence the storm, not the one outside nor the one within. The sound of rain on the glass windows became the echo of her words, her fearless eyes, the locket in his trembling hand. Memories he had buried deep returned with ruthless clarity. The day he chose wealth over love, the moment he walked away from the only woman who ever saw him as a man, not a tycoon. Money had built Adrien's empire, but it had also built walls around his heart, walls so tall he had convinced himself no one could climb them. Yet a 12-year-old girl had broken through without even trying. By dawn, he could no longer remain in his marble cage. Adrien ordered his car and demanded to be taken to the rundown orphanage, the place Sophie called home. When the door creaked open, the weary director eyed him with suspicion. His voice carried the weight of truth. "That girl has carried more than any child should. If you can't help her, then leave her be." Adrien stood there, silent, the weight of guilt and regret pressing down harder than his wheelchair ever could. He could walk away again, as he always had, but something inside him refused. For the first time in decades, Adrien wasn't ready to walk away this time. When Adrien finally found her, Sophie was seated on the orphanage floor, a cracked bowl in her lap. Around her, younger children huddled close, their thin hands reaching eagerly as she divided scraps of stale bread into smaller pieces, making sure each child had something, even if it meant leaving herself with almost nothing. Adrien's breath caught in his chest. The sight of her, so small, so fragile, yet carrying the weight of others, cut deeper than any wound life had ever dealt him. For the first time in years, the Iron Tycoon wheeled himself forward, then, with trembling arms, lowered to his knees before her. His voice broke, each word drenched in years of regret. "I thought I lost everything, but I didn't know I still had you." Sophie froze, her fingers tightening around the bowl. She looked at him, not as a millionaire, not as a powerful man, but as the one who had abandoned the woman she called mother. Her heart battled between anger and the desperate longing for family she had always dreamed of. The room seemed to hold its breath. The children stared wide-eyed as Adrien's tears struck the dusty floor. The man who once laughed at a child's plea was now begging for hers. In the weeks that followed, Adrien's presence at the orphanage became more than a fleeting act of charity. The man once known as the Iron Tycoon quietly began funding repairs. New beds replaced broken frames, warm meals filled the dining hall, and books replaced torn scraps of paper. But what changed the most was not written in ledgers or displayed in headlines. Adrien began to return, day after day. Not as a millionaire, not as a savior, but as something he had long forgotten how to be: a father. He read stories to the younger children, listened to their laughter echo through the halls, and when his eyes met Sophie's, he no longer saw a stranger, but a chance at redemption. It wasn't the bread she asked for that changed him. It was the reminder that love cannot be bought, only given. And in giving it, Adrien found what he had been searching for all along: not wealth, not power, but family. And so, what began with laughter ended with tears, and with a man rediscovering the one thing he thought he had lost forever: love. But let me ask you this: would you forgive a man like Adrien? Or was Sophie too kind? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Sophie's place? If this story moved you, hit the like button so more people can see it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the soul.